Hey there trainers, welcome back, and Happy New Year! You're with PewterCityJim today for an extra long, in-depth episode featuring quite a few designs inspired by a place I find intensely interesting. But first, hi. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel we do a bunch of Let's Play stuff and some art, primarily Fakemon stuff. If any of that sounds like fun to you, awesome. Please subscribe, like, engage in the comments. I do my best to reply and chat with everybody. Remember, trainer, you are welcome here. So, the Solar region. It's based on Southern California and some of the surrounding areas. Today, instead of looking at a couple of designs made to fit different Pokédex niches, we're gonna be looking at some designs that I've made to inhabit a very special place in the region, a place I've called Jasper. This is going to involve some world building and a bunch of real life history, and as such, man, I get it. If you're mostly just here for fun monsters, you can jump to the pictured timestamp to get right into the drawing and dex entries. No harm, no foul. If you, like me though, are interested in weird, off-the-wall places and strange environments, if you love history and mysteries, pull up a chair, grab yourself a beverage and snack, and let me weave you a tale while I show you my little vacation to one of the weirdest and honestly most wonderful places I've ever been. So yeah, I picked a vacation destination to help me design Fakemon, to get me fired up and inspired. Venturing out into a brand new region generally requires a starter Pokemon, but none of mine wanted to go. I guess it's you and me, Koibra. Go visit Fruppy's channel and store if you want a sick shirt like mine. This little guy accompanied me on my foray into the unknown, which started with an early morning train ride. Anyway, California City is a place most people haven't heard of, but it's a place I've been fascinated with ever since I found out about it years ago. To get some stats out of the way, it's the third largest city in California behind Los Angeles and San Diego. Los Angeles has a population of 3.8 million, give or take. San Diego is 1.3 million, again, give or take. Cal City, a little under 15,000. Now, let that sink in for a sec, okay? 15,000 might sound like a lot of people, but stacked up against almost 4 million? Or even 1.3, it's a pretty small town by most people's standards. I mean, not mine. My hometown had a population of 3,000 when I left, but it was also geographically tiny. You could walk from one end to the other in under an hour. California City, though, is over 200 square miles. So, back in 1958, Nathan K. Mendelsohn wanted to create a city to rival Los Angeles. A New York on the West Coast, Las Vegas in California. He bought up a bunch of land out in the middle of the Mojave Desert, right near the beautiful Sierra Madre mountain range. It's remote, though. About 100 miles north of Los Angeles, and you travel through some amazing but ultimately very lonely scenery to get there. Once he had the land, he started to lay everything out. Blocks of desert set aside for housing, commercial and retail spaces separated by paved streets. Water, power, and sewage all inlaid and ready to go for the lucky folks looking to live in the next big city. A national advertising campaign made big promises and drew in investors as he sold off parcels of land for super low prices, trying to entice people to move out there. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, a city needs a populace, right? The problem was, being so remote, a lot of people didn't live on the land that they bought. A city needs a populace, but a populace needs more than just power, water, and waste management. They need places to go, things to see, food, amenities, employment. Without those, people do lose interest. And to be fair, California City does have these things. There's Edwards Air Force Base, which does provide a lot of employment, and several great locally owned restaurants. And of course there's the McDonald's and a Starbucks, because, you know, of course there are. You have nearby national parks as well. It's a lovely town in its own way, it's just not big enough to bring in the number of people Mr. Mendelsohn wanted to see, especially back in the 50s and 60s. He built a massive park and called it Central Park after what he considered its counterpart in New York. He even christened it with water flown in from New York's own Central Park, which he put in the large man-made lake at its heart. This wasn't enough to keep people though, and eventually the population dwindled down to less than 1,000 residents in 1970. I spent a lot of time wandering in this park. It was the first place that I went after getting off the bus. I just had to see it for myself, but unfortunately most of it was gated off. It's still really pretty though. All you could hear was the water, the wind, and the crows. I sat there for a long while and I felt really at peace. In terms of the township itself, it's sort of spread out. There's not a lot of sidewalks, there aren't many people around. I asked a few folks I met about the place. I wanted to know their take on the history of the area. Most of them didn't know much, or didn't care much, or were from out of town just passing through. I got a giant pastrami sandwich for like $10 though. It was good. It came from Jesse's Pizza and the Aloha Plaza. I tracked down the Chamber of Commerce and I wasn't sure that I'd found the right spot, but no, it's just this little building. As night fell, I went back to my hotel surrounded by a murder of crows. The main thing I wanted to see though were those endless roads out in the desert. Don't ask me why, but I've wanted to walk those empty, dust-covered streets for literally years. Something about them just called to me since learning of them, and so I did it. I walked for miles, filming a little bit of it just to show you guys what it's like. The roads themselves aren't swept or maintained this far away from the center of town, so they're covered in dirt and dust, and the main way you can tell where they are is that because of the asphalt under the sand, larger plants that have deeper root systems don't grow on them. This makes these long, clean-cut swaths through the otherwise scrubby, thorny desert foliage. Again, all you can hear is the wind and the distant cawing of crows. Interestingly enough, California City is known for its birdwatching scene, just, not in the middle of winter, which is when I opted to visit. It was cold, about 45 degrees with a wind chill making it feel like 37 according to my weather app. Still, it was sunny enough that I got a little sunburn. It's an eerily peaceful place out here in the desert. I loved it, and I hope to do this again sometime in the near future. So why am I sharing all this on a channel that's known mostly for designing goofy monsters? If you've looked at my region map, you'll see 3 wild areas: an ocean, a forest, and a desert. This map was designed squarely in the middle of Generation 8 when the wild area was still new. I wanted 3 distinct biomes for my wild areas, and underneath the grid indicating where the desert wild area is, you'll see a road map. It was just lifted wholesale from the road map of California City. These roads all have names. Each plot has an official address, but when you travel to them and walk the streets, you're alone except for the wind, sand, and wildlife. I drew the first little bits of this map in late 2019. I'd always known this was the plan, and I was finally enacting it. As it stands right now, I am wandering the real-world analog to my region's reclaimed desert wilderness area. I wanted to come here and really get a feeling for the place, see what kinds of creatures, plants, landscapes, and areas are just waiting to be spotted here, and see if I can't use that knowledge to make some truly inspired Fakemon designs. Some things I saw out in the desert after walking tens of miles. Rows of telephone lines that stretch out as far as the eye can see. I saw something shimmering out in the distance, and I walked towards it only to find a bunch of old smashed up VHS tapes. The glimmer I saw was the wind blowing the shiny tape around so it could catch the sun. I saw groupings of RVs. I didn't film these to respect the privacy of the people living out here, but they were miles from any maintained roads. After getting back to town, I was exhausted, sunburned, starving, thirsty, and inspired. I reviewed my footage and photos and started scribbling down monster concepts in the notebook I'd brought with me. So, let's get started. The gateway to the desert wild area is known as the town of Jasper. I envisage this as Sola's Safari Zone, a wildlife preserve. It's small, with a Pokemon Center that doubles as your base of operations and lodgings for travelers and researchers, a Pokemart, of course, and a place to get the regional treat. There's also a small building where you'll be given the choice of 3 different Pokemon to take with you on your adventure. This wild area is dangerous, after all. Taking some with you for protection is advisable, and because this whole place is a preserve, you're not taking the rest of your team with you. A whole new adventure requires a new starter trio, and these make a type triangle, of course, this time fighting, flying, and rock. If you guessed that your other rivals would be there to snag the other 2 mons, you would be right. So let's just start with those designs. Though, first, let's introduce you to Professor Lynon. He's been living in this Pokemon Center for quite some time. His family bought this land over 70 years ago, and after their plans to build a city fell through, he decided to let the land go back to nature. He's been working to rewild this area ever since. He bought in Pokemon that were once native to the area and released them. He's even bought in seeds from plants that used to be abundant to allow them to repopulate, and he's been at this for decades, trying to repair the damage unnecessary development did to the area. He's not as young as he used to be though, so he would love some help documenting how this project is going, and, of course, that's where you and your rivals come in. As mentioned, this would be a point where your team and the regular PC storage become unavailable to you. You instead have access to Lyndon's PC storage system, which isn't connected to the network, and you're given an old-school field guide style book so you can look for Pokemon specifically from the territory of Jasper and record notes on them. You will notice that there are a few entries that cross-populate from your original Sola Pokédex though. Here are just a few of the creatures that you'd find elsewhere in Sola that are also common in the desert wild area, along with a fair few canon entries. This restriction wouldn't be a permanent thing. You'd be given a Legends Arceus-style laundry list of Pokédex quests to complete, and then, once you were done, you would have access to your regular stuff restored. Lynon himself is based on, who else, Nate Mendelsohn, and Lynon is the national tree from his country of origin, the Czech Republic. He's just a nice old fellow with a love for the natural world. Anyway, let's take a look at the 3 Pokemon that you'd start your Jasper territory adventure with. So I was told by a local that you didn't necessarily want to be wandering in the desert too late at night, as that's when the Coyotes are out in force and they hunt in packs. Despite disregarding this advice pretty much entirely and wandering around at night anyhow, I didn't see any. Closest I did see was this stray dog on my last day. But I'll be honest, coyote really aren't that uncommon, even in the part of SoCal I'm from. There's a wildlife trail not too far from my house, and when a vehicle with a siren, like an ambulance or police car, goes down the freeway, I can hear the coyotes nearby howling to match the tone. I always love to hear it. And again, I've known since jotting down the earliest ideas for Solo that I wanted a coyote Pokemon. My first thought was actually to make a Rockruff variant, but I settled on doing something completely original and working it into the lore surrounding Jasper. One thing about Coyote is that they have this amazing survival instinct. They can be urban, they can be rural, they can eat just about anything. There's studies of their gut contents that have shown them to eat shoes off of people's porches, for goodness sake. They're moving east through the states where wolves have been removed, and even as far as New York, where they're actually crossbreeding with wolves and stray dogs. They're rugged survivalists and, honestly, amazing creatures all around. Perfect for the fighting type. I gave it this nonplussed, deadpan stare that just says, "You really want to take me on? It's not gonna end well for you." But hopefully I made it cute enough. Its fighting style is boxing, of course, and it is the cool member of our trio. And here we have Upperpup, the survival Pokemon. Upperpup congregate in packs and hold regular sparring matches to establish dominance. They can eat almost anything, but especially love to prey on Graven and Blechleberry. Earn its trust and you'll have a friend for life. Of course we're gonna meet Graven and Blechleberry later in the video. It's a pure fighting type with the abilities Defiant, which sharply raises attack when any of its stats are lowered, Immunity, which prevents poisoning, and the hidden ability Technician, which makes weaker moves hit more powerfully. Like Upperpup is dissecting your defenses and using everything in its arsenal for best effect. Height and weight are average for a starter-coded Pokemon. Here are your stats and moves. Of course, this thing is focused on attack, speed, and has the defenses of wet tissue paper. It needs to get in, do the damage it wants to do, and then get out of there. Moves are a modest list of fighting-type moves, and moves that are fitting for your average canine. Upperpup would be the Jasper mission's medium difficulty. It can dish out massive hits, but if it takes too many, you're back at the center with your wallet feeling a little lighter. So what's next on the list? Ooh, the flying type. So I mentioned earlier in the video about the big park on the east side of California City. Central Park. Its history in Jasper would be very much the same. Water flown in from Unova to christen it and all. The one type of bird I saw swimming around when I went there was the coot. It's a pretty cool looking bird with a white beak that extends up into the forehead, shiny black plumage, and very unique feet that look almost armored. Locals told me that there are indeed normally ducks there, but they become a bit more scarce in the wintertime. Makes sense as it was pretty cold during my visit. So I wanted this to be my flying type starter. It's the serious one, as the name Coot makes me think of like a surly, unfriendly old guy. I imagine this Pokemon is having an old soul kind of vibe, very mature for its evolutionary level. Coot chicks are bright orange in the front, so I reused some colors from Upperpup. In fact, all 3 of Jasper's first companion Pokemon have similar colors to tie them all together, and to this landscape. It's got its wings raised up as though it were catching the sun to warm its body, and I made sure to emphasize the cool plate mail look of the Coot's feet for this Pokemon as well. And here we have Cooticle, the survey Pokemon. Because they can't fly well at this stage, they use their large feet as their primary mode of transportation, both in and out of the water. While they might seem standoffish, that's just their way, and they do form bonds quickly even if the feelings aren't well expressed. It's a pure flying type with the abilities Tough Claws, which boosts the power of contact moves, Intimidate, which can lower the opponent's attack, and the hidden ability Infiltrator, which allows it to bypass barrier type moves like Light Screen and Substitute. Very useful. The name is Coot and Cuticle combined, Cuticle being the layer of skin at the base of a nail. Being that this Pokemon's feet are a big feature of the design, this seemed appropriate. Here are your stats and moves. This Pokemon is a better all-rounder than Upperpup. It can do a bit of everything, but doesn't do one thing amazingly well. I would say this is your easy mode monster. It's got flying and slashing type moves at its disposal. And then of course we have our rock type entry. There's a desert tortoise conservation area near California City. You can go there and see them, though they brumate in winter when I went, so I didn't get to see any. I've always known I wanted to make a rock type Fakemon based on them. When coming up with the trio for Jasper, it seemed like a perfect match. The Mojave Desert Tortoise is the state reptile of both California and Nevada, of course. I wanted to give it a very happy but vacant look. Not a single thought detected. This design is a fairly simple one. It's exactly what it says on the tin, a rock-type tortoise. I kept seeing rocks used as decoration in yards and public spaces that had this cool gradation of rusty orange red down to a light cream color, and that's exactly the look that I wanted for this little goober. Also, the national park that's nearby is called the Red Rock Canyon National Park, and that's where I got the idea to name the town and territory Jasper. Fitting then that this little guy is literally a red rock. Again, it's using some of the same colors as the other two, and hopefully they're a pretty cohesive looking set. And here we have Torble, the Hunker Down Pokemon. Evidence suggests this Pokemon was once a ground type, but due to increased predation from Graven, it evolved over the generations into a rock type we're familiar with today. When pulled into their shells, they're indistinguishable from normal rocks except by using an X-ray machine. It's a pure rock type with the ability Sturdy, which prevents one-hit KOs, Rockhead, which removes damage from recoil moves, and the hidden ability Scrappy, which allows it to use any kind of attack to hit ghost types. The name Torble is just a really simple portmanteau of Tortoise and Pebble, of course, and it's extremely heavy. I think Ash Ketchum could probably still lift it with one arm, but most other folks would struggle. Stats and moves. This guy's a defensive powerhouse, especially for this evolutionary level, and able to deal with both special and physical attacks. Stall, using a range of defense boosting and barrier moves, while unfortunately not hitting for massive amounts of damage. This would be hard mode, for players interested in playing the long game in every battle. Slow and steady does win the race. Here's your professor, and you get to choose one of 3 partners for this brand new mini adventure. The place you're exploring would start out as relatively flat with those roads carved into the landscape. The further you go from the town of Jasper and into the wild area, the weirder and more remote things would feel. There are a bunch of landmarks and even another small settlement to check out as well. There's mountains on 2 sides, so there would be a lot of atmospheric shade depending on the time of day, punctuated by a blazing hot sun in the middle of the day. A desert adventure for you and your new pal. But of course, there are a lot of other creatures to run into as well. Let's check some out. Crows are a really common sight pretty much everywhere, but they were the main bird I saw and heard in California City. I wanted to create my own Corvid-inspired creature rather than using Murkrow, Rookidee, or making a regional variant of either. These birds can be a bit of a menace in regards to baby desert tortoises because they're smart enough to get into the protective shells on these little guys. That's why I bought it up in Torble's Dex entry, of course. Crows will pick up whichever small tortoise they can and drop it from a great height to crack the shell. That's why Torble's primary ability is Sturdy. It would retain at least some of the HP and be able to hopefully get away if this happened to it. Though heavy as it is, I'd hate to see the bird that could lift it. I wanted to create something a bit spooky. Years ago, Misty bought me a Halloween decoration that's a skeleton parrot. It lives atop my monitor watching me work, and I've always wanted to create a monster somewhat inspired by it. This crow seemed like the perfect opportunity. There's a fully animated skeleton in there, and it's surrounded by ghostly energy that's holding it all together and keeping it going. A little morbid? Sure, but Cubone wears its dead mom's skull as a hat, so that ship's kinda sailed, no? To counterbalance the grisly nature of a dead bird reanimated, I gave it big wide eyes and a bit of a smile on its beak. The tongue, though, is a sickly blue color to remind us that, it's dead. You'd find these all over the place, and their cries would be all throughout the soundtrack of the area. And here we have Graven, the Hungry Soul Pokemon. Graven are constantly searching for food despite lacking the internal structure required to make eating worthwhile. One of the most intelligent Pokemon you could find commonly, this intelligence is almost always focused on something they'll never receive a benefit from. The food it eats just falls right out of its lower body. It's a ghost and flying type and has the abilities Gluttony, which encourages the early use of a Elderberry, Curse to Body, which might disable a move used against it, and the hidden ability Gale Wings, which gives flying type moves priority. It's a small Pokemon and extremely light. Not only is it just skin and bone, those bones are hollow. Here are your stats and moves. It's not the strongest monster out there, but its special attack and defense are decent for a little bird. The move list is pretty standard ghostly fare with some dark and flying type moves in there as well. I wanted to differentiate it as much as possible from Drifloon and Drifblim as they all share types. Alright, on to the next creature. I didn't see a lot of bugs out in the desert, but I did come across several nests of ants. I love bugs, but I'm far from an expert entomologist or myrmecologist, so identifying these isn't something that I can do. If you have a guess, let me know in the comments. One thing I wondered is, how did these ants all get water? I found several small temporary ponds out there, but the ants' nests that I saw weren't close to them, so I wondered a lot about what they ate and where they get moisture. Then they started biting my ankles and, so I left. One thing I do know is that there's a massive aquifer under California City. They drilled wells into it to provide water for the town, and private property owners can apply to do the same. I suddenly had this idea of these ants accessing underground water, and more than that, storing it within themselves like honeypot ants store sugar. This is probably one of the simplest designs I've ever done, and it's also kind of one of my favorites. I was inspired by ant larvae and eggs, of course, but also by tardigrades and bacteria and other single-celled organisms. These guys are just little water storage storage tanks that can spit water out for use by the colony of ants that they live in. The main part of the creature, the guts and goop and liver and brain and stuff, are all in that dark nucleus in the center, which is covered by a thin-skinned water balloon of an animal. He's just a little water bottle. And then here we have Grubble, the droplet Pokemon. Grubble take in as much water as they can and hold on to it for later use. They're almost never seen above ground and can be hard to raise as they're very fragile. It's a bug and water type, of course. Its abilities are damp, which prevents the use of self-destructing moves, clear body, which prevents its stats from being lowered, and the hidden ability, water absorb, which restores HP if hit by a water type move. The name's just Grub and Bubble and a cute little portmanteau. It's a very small Pokemon, as would be expected of an ant larvae probably. Stats and moves are extremely weak. It's just a little bug that you snagged out of the ground by stepping on an anthill, you big bully. It doesn't even know what the outside world is yet, let alone how to fight, but it can use several bubble moves, some bug type stuff, and a few ground type moves, being that it has a subterranean lifestyle. Alright, let's go for another bird. There's 3 of them, and this is the 3rd. One thing I noticed a lot in California City was tumbleweeds. They were everywhere. Despite having this reputation of being part of the Wild West thanks to the movies, they aren't even native to America. These are Russian in origin, the Russian thistle to be precise. But I watched these things just running around as the wind picked up, and honestly, they came across the road I was walking down so much it kind of reminded me of that old joke, why'd the chicken cross the road? To get to the other side. Except that these weren't chickens, they were weeds, and their real goal was to spread their seeds far and wide. One creature that lives out here, as evidenced by the welcome sign for California City, is the Roadrunner. Again, not a chicken, but once the bird connection was made in my brain, it just wouldn't leave. And I know we already have a couple of tumbleweed Pokemon, and look, I don't hate them or anything, and we all know how much I love Objectmon in general. The idea of a possessed tumbleweed ghost is definitely more out of the box than what I came up with here, and my design is quite a bit more basic by comparison. I'll freely admit this. But the mental image of a bunch of these guys just roaming around wherever the wind takes them is adorable to me, so I hope you like it. A Roadrunner mixed with a tumbleweed making a round, airborne bird that collects and redistributes seeds as it goes? Sounds like a plus for the ecosystem to me. I gave it a happy little face, just like it's loving this life of going wherever the wind carries it. And here we have Runbleweed, the tumbling Pokemon. Runbleweed's feathers are fine and fluffy, and they're perfect at grabbing seeds dispersed by desert plants. As the wind picks them up and rolls them around, these seeds find new homes. Introducing a flock of Runbleweed into any desert will encourage more plant growth. It's a flying and grass type with the abilities Wind Rider, which removes the grass type's weakness to wind and gust type moves while boosting attack when hit with one. Seed Sower, which initiates grassy terrain upon being hit, and the hidden ability is Leaf Guard, which prevents status conditions when the weather is sunny. For a first stage Pokemon, it's actually quite big. I found individual tumbleweeds taller than 4 feet, which is kinda nuts. And here are your stats and moves. Lots of wind-themed stuff, and your kinda standard grass-type attacks with a special focus on seed-based moves so that it could tie in with the lore. Alright, Russian thistles? Sure. Let's move on to horse nettles. While I was wandering around, I saw these bright yellow berries, and I was kind of intrigued. They look like little yellow gooseberries, or teeny tiny yellow tomatoes. I resisted my basic impulse to try one, and boy, howdy am I glad that I did. After a little googling and asking around, I found out that these are just called horse nettle berries, and they induce vomiting, diarrhea, lowered blood pressure to sometimes fatal levels, abdominal cramps, fever, and a swollen throat. So, you know, not an ideal thing to eat miles from nowhere. I might have evolved into a ghost type. I had to make it a Pokemon at that point. I just had to. I wanted to give this thing sort of gloom vibes. It's just so poisonous that it's made itself sick. The leaves on its head are dead, and it's just drooling viscous poison all the time. I imagine its cry just sounding like an aggravated groan. It has fat, short little legs because it just wanders around slowly, plodding away and feeling sorry for itself. A bit like Psyduck always having a headache, this thing always feels like it's on the verge of throwing up. And here we have Blechleberry, the gross Pokemon. Blechleberry contain a delicate mix of toxins seldom seen in the natural world. How all these chemicals can exist within its body without spontaneously combusting is a mystery, but scientists hope to uncover the truth behind it one day. They leach impurities from the soil as food. So they sort of draw out unnatural gunk from the soil and help purify the land. Very useful. They are, of course, a grass poison type, and they have the ability Biohazard. Oh, yeah, so this is a new custom ability. Essentially, if this Pokemon is hit with a physical attack, it can no longer contain itself and belches poison all over the battle area, creating a terrain called Toxic Terrain. This induces the poison status on all Pokemon on the field, even its partner if it's battling in doubles, and any Pokemon who's switched in while this effect is active. Poison-type moves also have an extra 10% effectiveness while the Toxic Terrain is in effect. This is the only available ability. It's a relatively large Pokemon for a first-stage grass type as well, and it's sort of swollen looking. It's also on the heavy side. Here are your stats and moves. Nothing terrifying stats-wise, but you have a heavy arsenal of poison and grass-type moves along with a few surprises that might hint at its evolution. Speaking of grass types, one thing that I picked up from my time in the desert? Burrs. Burrs and burrs and burrs. I walked into the hotel lobby and my shoes stuck to the carpet with every step like I was wearing Velcro on my soles. They were dotted with these things pretty much all over. This is, of course, how the plants get their seeds from one place to another. I wanted to make another grass line that was kind of a crazy, manic-looking little devil. A creature covered in spikes, but not a cactus-based grass type. Something that looked pumped up and ready to fight. The burrs on my shoes were all shades of brown and yellow with a little light green, so I kept those colors in mind while designing. I gave it sharp teeth, an eye twitch, and made it look like it's yelling and about to charge. I hope you like it. And here we have Gurr, the spike Pokemon. Gurr roam the desert looking to pick fights. They don't care who or what they get to hit so long as they're dealing out damage. Studies of its behavior are short and to the point. All this Pokemon thinks about is how to be the biggest jerk possible in any given situation. It's a grass and fighting type with the ability Burrs. Again, this is a custom ability. It introduces a new terrain type and prickly terrain. This functions like rough skin or rocky helmet. When the opposing Pokemon lands a hit, Burrs scatter all over the field, and any hit that lands deals a bit of damage to the user. And a grass type version of spikes. Whenever a Pokemon is switched into the battlefield, they take a bit of damage automatically, including ally Pokemon in doubles. The name? Burr and Gurr. Pretty simple. Here are your stats and moves. The attack stat on this Pokemon for being so small is a little on the wild side, but other than that, it's fairly frail. Good move pool though. Alright, last monster of the video. In January of 2024, I put up a poll. It was the first thing I did online after getting home from my vacation. I wanted to know which Unova water or water adjacent type out of these four would you guys want to see as a regional variant for a special place in Sola. My thought process being, what if they scooped up some water Pokemon while getting water from Unova to Chris and Jasper's version of Central Park, and what if those Pokemon changed over a few generations to better suit this new land? In the end, there was a very clear winner in Tynamo. Sorry for the wait, but I've been working on these designs all year, so I hope it was worth it. I wanted to keep the spirit of Tynamo intact, the Pokemon with no weaknesses. The canon version is of course just pure electric. With its ability to levitate, that means that ground type moves can't touch it, and so it has no type that can hit it for super effective damage. The only other possible combination for this would be Poison and Dark with the same levitate ability. I made it look more front heavy, like a bit of a bruiser, and I changed the elegant white of the original for a blue, black, and green combination that makes me think of a critter that squirms around in shallow, muddy water. I'm envisioning some sort of lamprey creature that just sinks those teeth into bigger fish and doesn't let go till it's full. There are no lamprey in the lake at Central Park, of course, but there are plenty of catfish, I'm told. And here we have Solarian Tynamo, the parasite Pokemon. Tynamo and Sola have changed to adapt to a place with little to no electricity. They instead feed on the life force of other Pokemon. Swimming in any body of water where they live is a dangerous thing to do and is not advised. Like I said, it's a dark poison type with the ability Levitate. It's still pretty small, much like its Unovan ancestors, and just a hair heavier to account for some additional muscle mass. Here are your stats and moves. A similar BST to Unovan Tynamo, but rearranged to suit the new lifestyle. Tynamo retains exactly one electric type move, and it has a leeching move as well as some moves to give it stab advantage. And there we have it, trainers. 9 new Pokemon for a completely new area of Sola. A new frontier with a bunch of critters for you to discover, befriend, and evolve. Yeah, you'll notice all of these are base stages. What do they become? You'll have to wait for the next Project Jasper video to find out. This video has been a passion project for me for almost a year at the time of writing the final parts of this script. I really hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you've made it this far, do me a favor and put a grrr in the comments. Let's see how many of you got all the way to the end. I can't wait to catch you in the next video, trainers, but till then, take care. Bye!